This is Mike Kenyon here for a talk entitled What Do the Names of Rivers and Places Tell Us About Our Past? What we will try to cover will be in the following sections. We'll have a brief introductory section. We'll then talk about the linguistic evidence for interactions between different language and populations over the past 2 millennia. We'll then look at some of the different origins of our river and place names. We'll then start focusing in on the issue of click sounds in river names and where they come from. And that's really the important material. We'll then look at one of the earliest maps that we've got of this region and the names that appear there. This is Wenzel's 1752 map from the Butler official Cape Dutch expedition through to the Eastern Cape. We'll then talk about some Khoesan river names. We'll then pick up on one or two little complications to see what answers we can think of. Then we'll look lastly at the current correcting or renaming, depending how you want to view it, of place names across the country and in the Eastern Cape. And finally, I'll provide a list of some sources. Thank you. Let's now turn to the linguistic evidence on the interactions. The following passages which we'll cite, which I'll read, were written by Gerrit Haring in the late 1960s and published as part of a volume which was one of the first major Africanist academic collections on South Africa, titled African Societies in Southern Africa, edited by Leonard Thompson, a former South African academic, and arising from a conference held in Zambia. Sadly, Haring was denied a visa to enter South Africa for further work, and to the detriment of South African historiography. These passages are based largely on linguistic work published up to that time. There's been some further development of this linguistic approach, but the basic argument outlined by Haring remains valid. Some of the earliest links between Khoesan and Nguni languages were made by Carl Meinhof on the back of work done on sand languages by Wilhelm Bleek in Cape Town. Both were German linguists. Meinhof, who lived from 1857 to 1944, published the earliest work on this connection in 1904 and 1905. However, he later went on to publish in line with racial stereotypes, racist nonsense, and in 1933 he became a member of the German Nazi Party. To balance things out somewhat, a great niece was Ulrika Meinhof, who was a founder member of the Red Army faction, a 1970s violent revolutionary movement in West Germany. Most of them are dead now. William Bleek and his sister-in-law, Lucy Lloyd, and later his daughter Dorothea, were a formidable team of linguists and the subject of the study by UCT's Andrew Bank, Bushmen in a Victorian World, the remarkable story of the Bleek-Lloyd collection of Bushman folklore. They did amazing work early in the 20th century. A Rhodes University academic by the name of Len Lanham later also looked, in addition to the specific influence of San on isiXhosa. The Bleek work was done very much with San from the northern Cape. Okay, to the linguistic evidence, quoting Gerrit Haring, comparative analyses of Khoi and Xhosa linguistic interrelationships indicate that interaction between Khoi and Xhosa peoples was intimate and of long duration. The contact profoundly affected the phonemic system of the Xhosa language, one of the Nguni subgroup of Bantu languages. The influence of the Khoi phonemic system was largely confined to Xhosa consonants. Of some 55 consonants, matched by about 28 Proto-Nguni consonants of the Xhosa phonemic stock, 21 are primarily traceable to the Khoi sound system. 15 of these 21 are so-called click consonants. As C. Meinhof first proved, they are of non-Nguni origin. For Proto-Bantu, Proto-Nguni, and genetically related Bantu languages uninfluenced by Khoesan do not contain such speech sounds. Just definition, if anyone's not clear, to remind you, the meaning of cognate is that of a word having the same linguistic derivation as another. So, for example, in English, we have the word father. The equivalent in German is Vater, and the Latin is pater. Father, Vater, pater. Similar sound system. Through studying these cognates, we can begin to discern borrowings between different languages, the speakers of these languages, and what the borrowings may tell us about the relations between these speakers and people. Back to quoting Harinck, about 1/6 of the Xhosa vocabulary is composed of words with clicks. A smaller section has non-click consonants, also of Khoi origin. Okay. Many of these words are cognates of Khoi words, and they may be traced back into such Khoi languages as Kora and Nama. The Khoi words borrowed by Xhosa are significant from the historian's point of view. In addition to providing topographical information, they also point to socio-economic relationships between Khoi and Xhosa peoples. They cover both material and non-material aspects of Xhosa culture. The Kora and Nama languages are teetering on the point of extinction, as I understand. Okay. Topographical information obviously refers to land and descriptions of rivers, places, mountains, features of the Earth's surface. Based on place names, Reverend Charles Petman came to the same familiar conclusion, published back in 1920 in the South African Journal of Science. Quote from Harinck, Petman analyzed European travelers' renditions of Xhosa and Khoi place names with clicks and concluded that at one time Khoi and San inhabited the Transkei as far as the Mzimvubu River. In account from a Xhosa dictionary, Meinhof found about 50 river names and 6 mountain names commencing with clicks. Several of the roots of these names have cognates in Nama. We'll develop that a little bit further and challenge some of the assumptions in that shortly. The Khoi word, the cognates rather, extend way beyond river names into the core of our economy and society, cattle, in other words. To quote, Khoi word roots and phonetic elements exist in Xhosa nomenclature, denoting aspects of the socio-economic and ritual spheres. The cattle group contains terms for the variegated color combinations of cattle which are derived from Khoi. The Xhosa word inkomo, head of cattle, was derived from Khoi, Goma, and I don't know how to pronounce the rest of it, head of cattle. It replaced the older form Inombe, Proto-Bantu Yombe, Gombe, which has been retained in the Hlonipha language of Xhosa women. Some other Khoi derivatives are for milk, and again, pronunciation I'm not sure, Xhosa ubisi, grass, ina, and merino sheep, igusha. A cognate of Inombe is the word used in the Shona language of Zimbabwe for cattle. I think, if I remember correctly, the word is mombe. As newcomers into an area, Amaxhosa would have depended on first people, Khoesan, for understandings not only of the physical world, but also of the immaterial world and spiritual world. So, quote, the Xhosa religious group, in inverted commas, contains numerous semantic correspondences of Khoi words. A few examples give us for magic in Khoi, give us the word Ikricha, diviner. And we also get for supreme being in Khoi, we get in Xhosa Utiko, the supreme being, or a supreme being. A considerable number of Xhosa terms for diseases, which were also associated with the spiritual world, calling upon the ancestors, and procedures of animal sacrifice are of Khoi origin. The cognates can also tell us something about the migration, locations, and timeframes of people and their languages. So, quoting, terms for geographical features were in fact, in inverted commas, borrowed from Khoi and San by the Xhosa as they and other southern Nguni invaded the Khoi territories in the Transkei. Not sure about that word. Anyway, back to the quote. By extension, Khoi and San occupied the regions between the Fish and the Mzimvubu rivers prior to the entry of the southern Nguni. Since place names with clicks are scarce northeast of the Mzimvubu and in Natal, we may deduce that this area was occupied by the ancestors of the southern Nguni for a much longer period of time than the region southwest of that river. The extensive period of contact in the Transkei must have been intermittently violent. Xhosa is derived from the Khoi verb stem meaning to destroy. Trading relations between Xhosa and Khoi chieftains are suggested by the Xhosa and Khoi common word borrowings from Arabic for exchange article and the intoxicating plant dacha. Okay, there's quite a lot in there. So that's one argument as to why the names of rivers in KwaZulu-Natal, while there are very few with clicks in them because of the longer duration of Nguni settlement, southern Nguni, i.e. Zulu, etc., settlement in that area. Remember that the AmaXhosa, Bondo, Tembo, etc., were the southernmost group, and so probably the last to get here. Okay, whereas Natal had been settled by late Iron Age people slightly earlier as slowly movement headed south. So there's a further point about the origin of the name also. Okay. And then there's the point about trading relations. I think the Arabic word for exchange article that's been referred to there is something like imali. Okay. If I recall correctly, another word of Arabic origin is assegai. Okay. I forget the exact Arabic word, and I probably wouldn't pronounce it anyway. But we'll return later to the issue of the early areas of settlement and what was going on north of the Mzimvubu. There is really no end to what we can infer from these cognates, these cognate words, including political and power relationships. So back to Mr. Haring. The Xhosa retained many Bantu forms for all religious institutions and ritual practices, also denoted by Khoi borrowings, which indicate that these institutions and practices existed prior to contact with Khoi, and were not wholly adopted from Khoi culture. Moreover, these retentions imply that although the Xhosa incorporated Khoi peoples, they remained in control of the regulation of public affairs. The Khoi-derived cognates in the Xhosa cattle group suggest that Khoi were relegated to a socially inferior position in a patron-client relationship, Xhosa being the patrons and the Khoi their clients as cattle herders, messengers, envoys, and so forth. Important functions carried out by male Xhosa, such as cattle milking, must have remained the Xhosa's prerogative. The term ukusenga, to milk, was not replaced by Khoi equivalent. Okay, let's deal with the origins of our river and place names and talk about some examples. We're focusing on a small but important subset of words, the names of rivers, places, and a couple of animals as well, if we want, but we'll stick to rivers and places to see what they tell us and do not tell us about our pre-colonial and colonial past. So we can start with the easy ones, especially those of colonial towns and villages, and get some of them out of the way, especially the ones which are direct transliterations of English or Dutch names. Ibai for what was Port Elizabeth, now Khoesan, from Algoa Bay, presumably Bay Bai, Ikapa from Cape Town, Aradokwe for Craddock. But more important for our discussion are the names of places which derive from rivers. So, some examples. Mpongo for McLeantown, the name of the river. Uwa for Butterworth, the name of the river. Mahuni for the Nahoon River and Urin settlement and the suburb of Nahoon. Komani for Queenstown, Kumcha for Kumcha Town, Ngangahu for Maclear. Ngangahu was the original, was Khoesan name, was Khoi name, for what the Dutch referred to as the Mooi River, which flows through Maclear. Nweba for the Sundays River, and also for the place Janssenville, and Khoesan, the name of the Barkens River in Port Elizabeth, not a very big river at all, but the name now for Port Elizabeth. Professor Jeff Perez, explained the greater significance of rivers to the amaXhosa and Nguni people generally, possibly much wider than just Nguni people. To quote from Perez in 2003, second edition of the House of Paulo, it was the water, not the land, which determined the pattern of human settlement. Areas with many rivers and streams could accommodate many people and many different communities. A large land area drained by a single river was likely to be occupied by a single community only. Ideally, each chieftain had its own river and each sub-chiefdom had its own tributary. The hinterland was no more than the appendage of the river, an undefined reservoir of pasturage and hunting ground to which different communities had overlapping claims. But there was no latitude for doubt in the matter of access to water. Only the people of the community and their cattle had the right to drink the water of their own particular stream. Thus, nearly all Xhosa place names are the names of rivers, with a very few exceptions for mountains and lakes. Since we reside here in what is now officially Kugompo, what other names are widely used for what was called East London? Well, Emonti seems to be a direct translation, referencing the river mouth, Mont in Afrikaans, perhaps also in Dutch. I'm not sure if Mont is the same word from Afrikaans into Dutch. A comment on Kugompo by Professor Leslie Bank, who was for many years the head of the Fort Hare Institute of Social and Economic Research here at the University of Fort Hare, the campus here in Imondi, who's now teaching at Walter Sisulu University. His comment in the Daily Dispatch earlier this year in an article, a feature article, Kugompo speaks to restorative Xhosa masculinity and nationalism as a site of male and military preparation for conflict. That's the Cove Rock, the actually named Kugompo. Cove Rock is a much later addition. He carries on, Imonti is a metaphor for an open wound, referencing, imagine, dispossession and struggle. Okay, so looking to click sounds in river names, these obviously may tell us a great deal about our past, or at least hint at it. And river names with clicks and related sounds are an obvious and easily identifiable category. So remember, about 1/6, obviously, Xhosa words contain click sounds, dropping to less than 5% to our north for isiZulu language. So where do these names come from and who spoke them? Looking at the distribution of river and place names with clicks is very revealing. If we move from the Khoesan area west of the Nweba or Sundays River, as far as northeast as tributaries of the Mzimvubu River in Bondoland, Emapondweni, there are many with clicks. Khoesan itself is the isiXhosa name for the Barkens River in the city, as we've said. The list on the screen is a list taken from a 1985 master's thesis on the early Iron Age in the Transkei in the Eastern Cape by the late Jim Feely. And it's just an indicator. There are more, as we'll see shortly. If we look at this area from the Kai River up to 32 degrees south and 29 degrees east, which intersects the coast between Coffee Bay and the River mouth, we see a whole further group of names, and this is the area which the same Jim Feely pointed out in his thesis is the exact stretch of coast which is littered with pottery accredited to Khoesan pastoralists. Zoom in a little bit and look at the interior area. Names of rivers with Khoesan origin generally extend not just to this point, 29 east, 32 south, but if we look into the foothills of the Katlamba Mountains and the basin of the Mzimvubu and its tributaries, there are also names for rivers which are clearly of Khoesan origin, such as the Ingqu tributary of the Mzimvubu, which flows through the Tsolo area. Ingqu is a Xhosa word for isiXhosa for wildebeest. Possibly Ingqu for black wildebeest is a variation of that. North of the same cutoff, supposed cutoff point 32 south and 29 east, are a number of smaller coastal rivers, none of them perennial, and places with names containing cliques. South of the Mzimvubu, but north of 32 degrees south are the Ncibe, the Mqaleni, and the Twaleni. North of the Mzimvubu, between the Mboiki and Mzikaba rivers, are the Tutweni and the Mbatleni. There's also a village marked Tutweni and a location on the coast between Mboiki and the point where the Tutweni meets the coast called Mgagama. Just north of the Mzikaba is the area known as Xolobeni for the current ongoing dispute over the mining of frontal dunes for minerals and the position of the empty toll road and offshore gas and oil exploration in the Indian Ocean. A major tributary to the west of the Mzikaba is the Tuch, which has a tributary, the Ngagumbe. The Mponda Great Place near Lusigisiki, the town of Lusigisiki, is at Kaukeni, and the local municipality is called Nguza Hill after a landmark made famous during the Mponda Revolt of 1960. Interestingly, if we look further north, and bearing in mind what we said about the longer Nguni, southern Nguni speaking population in the area which is KZN, what in English was pronounced as the Ikopo district, Opo. Clearly, click sounds have survived up there. I want to refer to the map, the 1752 map by surveyor and cartographer Wenzel on that official expedition under Ensign Butler. So they traveled on a coastal route as far east as the area around Butterworth, as it was once known. The expedition was a disaster in terms of information gathered about the territory and inhabitants and business and economic opportunities. And to this extent, that was a failure. Butler was actually fired or sent packing on his return. But Wenzel produced, at the time, a very detailed map with his hearing and recording, or the expedition's hearing and recording of river names. Almost all the names he recorded sound like Khoesan names at a time when there were already significant Xhosa groups far west of the Ngiba Kai River. This is the images of the entire map, which has a lot of detail, and we'll zoom in for the next 2 or 3 slides. Another 2 or 3 slides. Okay, so we've zoomed in now to this section of Wenzel's map from Berge, Algo Bay through to the Kai River. If we move east in easterly direction from left to right from Berge Algo Bay, Rivers have recognizable Dutch names until the Bushman's River, and fish rivers with Dutch spelling of these names. Okay, then we'll move on to the next slide. Now we are looking at the far eastern section of the map between the fish and Kai rivers. And here we can recognize, well, the handwriting is still rather small despite enlarging this. There's the recognizable Khoesan, spelt rather oddly. There's also the Tjolonga with a Khoekhoen or bastardized Khoekhoen version, Kromanka, and similarly with those that follow. I'm giving the Khoesan or Khoekhoen followed by isiXhosa, or whatever we know the place as. So there's the Kauka, which we know as the buffalo, possibly the Onle, as former King Williamstown takes its name now. There's the Mahuri, which is the Mahuni, known for many years in English as the Nahoon. There's the Kaninga, which I'm guessing is the Kaniga, flowing through the suburb of Bonza Bay. There's the Kunumbe River, another suburb and river in Imonti, Kugompo. Then there's the Kurecha, which I'm guessing is the Kulecha, the Kurechai, probably the Bulucha, the Tinsa, clearly the Tinsa River, and the Quenonsha, which I imagine is the Quenucha River. Now, why are these names in 1752 all recorded as Khoekhoen or Khoesan sounding names? The isiXhosa were in the area. We know that by around about this time, King Palo of the isiXhosa had a kraal, a great place on the Azili stream, tributary of the Buffalo or Kauka or Onle River. Was these names recorded as such by Wenzel because the Xhosa had not yet given their own names to these rivers? It's a possibility. But what might be more likely is that Wenzel and the Butler party were reliant on the names provided by their Khoekhoen guides and staff who set out from the Western Cape. The expedition would have enlisted their staff, particular Khoekhoen staff from the Western Cape, who would not have been familiar with dialects far away in the Eastern Cape, even Khoekhoen dialects. Okay. On the route, the expedition would have enlisted local guides where possible for their familiarity with the local terrain, names of places. Where possible, these locally enlisted helpers would probably have also been Khoekhoen, or at least isiXhosa who were conversant in the local Khoekhoen language. So they would most likely have shared Khoekhoen names with the Western Cape Khoekhoen for ease of understanding, rather than isiXhosa names, which would certainly not have been understood by anyone based in the Western Cape, okay, or certainly unlikely, even by the Khoekhoen from the Western Cape. So the river names described were most probably taken from local residents as they were understood by Western Cape Khoekhoen, who did not speak the same Eastern Cape dialect, and then translated for the Dutch to write down. These were many steps in the process, and the likelihood of many mistakes clearly were a consequence. Okay, right, let's move on. Let's now focus on one or two river names and just look at some of the detail that has been published on the sources of some of these names. The first quote is from Carl Vernon, the late Carl Vernon, who worked out the 1752 Butler expedition route as described by Wenzel in his map. And Carl's combination of various sources gives Kai Kai River, spelled K-E-I. The word is Khoi and means either large or sand. The word may also encompass stones, as the earliest Dutch and English names for the Kai, recorded in 1783, were Klip River, Klip Rivier, and Stone River. In 1752, Butler translated Kai as Sand River. The Great Kai in isiXhosa is the Nxiba. The Xhosa name of the White Kai is Ikonga, while in Khoi it is Kamsiki, if I've got the pronunciation right, and may refer to the Khoi word Kham, which is a place where one can drink. The origin of the name of the White Kai is not known, but goes back to 1790 or before. Then, according to a 2014 edition of the Dictionary of South African Place Names, Kai is of Khoi origin, meaning sand, river in inverted commas, meaning recorded in 1752. The same source gives Nu Kai as the Khoi name for the Black or Swart Kai River, Kai being derived from the old Cape Khoi word for sand again. And then the Dictionary of South African English seems to agree as well. Origin, Khoi case, Sant, used as the name of the river forming the border between the old Cape Province and Transkei. The Kai River also appears on Wenzel's map as the Khu River Y, possibly where we get this variation of the Kai River, spelled K-Y-E. Interestingly, is that up in the far right of the map, the Tholeni tributary of the Kai River also appears, distinctly not Khoesan, and probably indicating one indication we have of the establishment is for some time of isiXhosa in the area by this point in time. The expedition also recorded the Kai River in Dutch, in text, in the journal as IJ, which we can also pronounce as A or Y. Okay, and this might explain the alternative spellings of K-E-I as K-Y-E and K-Y in some of the early sources. What we don't know, and this is according to Crampton, Perez, and Vernon's editing of the Butler Journal, whereas all authorities agree that the word Nxiba is of Khoi origin, they do not seem to get much further than that. So we don't know how we got to Nxiba, but my guess would be that it's got something to do with the deeply incised or cut valleys of the Kai River. If we turn our minds to the Khoesan River and look at origins and meanings from the same dictionary of South African place names, the component Kai, not sure where the S comes from, is comparable to the Khoesan word for broad, and the component Kama cognate with the old Cape Khoi Kama water or river, okay, and they're the Nama equivalents. Just to move north, the entire Garib River, which is known as the Senku in Sesotho and Lesotho, was known to the Dutch as the Groot River before Colonel Robert J. Gordon in 1777 named it the Orange River in honor of the Dutch royal house. 2 years earlier, by 1775, the existence of the New Garib, or Black River, east of the confluence with the Vaal, the Kai, or Kai Garib, or Upper Garib, formerly known to settlers as the Groot Rivier, was certainly known to colonists along the frontier of white settlement. And in that year, a commando against Bushman raiders, which was proceeding along the Sea-Kai River, under Adrian van Jaarsveld, attempted to find a guide to take them there. Now, a little complication for what we've been saying. The cuckoo for merino sheep is GU-S. Not sure how to pronounce that. This is the origin of the isiXhosa igusha, plural. On the right are imvu, okay, which sounds like isiXhosa rather than Khoesan. Now, imvu are the hairy and fat-tailed sheep which were the basis of Khoesan society from about 2,000 years ago. How is it, is the question, that what appears to be the later animal, merino sheep, gusha, are given an older, apparently Khoesan name? So it's a little bit of a riddle, isn't it? But one suggestion is that we might explain this, certainly the use of gusha, not sure about imvu, but we might explain gusha by considering two factors. The crucial thing is that the Khoesan pastoralist society was overwhelmed, in fact destroyed, okay, by the late 18th century by two advancing groups, the Dutch pastoralists with guns and horses from the west, and the far more numerous and powerful isiXhosa from the east. The Khoesan lost their herds of sheep, and many, if not most, became farm laborers and herdsmen, first for Dutch pastoralists, and then for English farmers who really spread the development of the merino wool sheep industry. So when merino sheep were introduced in great numbers in western parts of the Eastern Cape from the 1830s, there was a great incidence of Khoesan herders of merino sheep, and they used their old name for the earlier sheep for the new Spanish breed of merinos. That's my take on it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Hopefully someone does come up with something better. Now, there's a question about what is happening, the official process around correcting or renaming, if you want, place names across the country, across the Eastern Cape. So there's been some recent debate, even controversy in some quarters, around the renaming of rivers and places. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any controversy. I think there are some perhaps inconsistencies in the process that's taking place. But let's just go back in time a little bit. As far back as 1915, most of the names now being considered or formalized were then recorded in a Xhosa English dictionary as widely used and commonly understood. Most of them are and were used by the majority of South Africans and have been since long before they were recorded in the dictionary. The extract in the slide is from James McLaren's A New Concise Xhosa English Dictionary, first published in 1915, revised in 1936 by W.G. Benny, and in 1963 put into the standards orthography by poet and Reverend J.J.R. Jolobe. The list appears at page 194, and it's simply headed place names. Obviously, from the content, it is not an extensive list, but it does indicate this long history of river and place names which were not officially recognized, yet were used extensively by the majority of citizens. So many of the name changes now being formalized are in fact old names, hundreds of years old, possibly some of them, which are isiXhosa and in all probability derive from isiXhosa names, which in turn probably derive from Khoesan names in the ways that we've suggested above. So, if I might venture, rather than any controversy being framed as renaming, a more appropriate description might be democratizing and correcting our names. Let me try to summarize what I've been trying to convey in these past 40 or so minutes. Firstly, that there's been a long history of interaction between speakers of Khoesan languages and isiXhosa as representing Southern Nguni language speakers, and this has led to extensive borrowing of sounds and names. Secondly, that click sounds in isiXhosa are a common and unique indicator of the early extensive borrowing and exchange. Complicated process, which hopefully we've given some indication of, thanks to Mr. Gerrit Haring in particular. Thirdly, there's also, of course, been some later borrowing from Dutch and English names into isiXhosa. Fourthly, a close look at Eastern Cape river names and some place names illustrates my argument. Fifthly, we have to be cautious, though, in using our sources as indicated by the names on the Wenzel maps, which raises questions about the accuracy of the way in which Khoesan names were recorded. And finally, the current official renaming of places is a misnomer. It may best be described as democratizing and correcting. Thank you. And here, if anyone wants to take this further, are some of the sources that you might find useful, and sources which I've used quite liberally in this presentation. Thank you very much.